Hey guys, tonight I'm your host, Marcus Ried, and we begin with some of history's most notorious figures, the outlaws, the murderers, and the walking disasters that somehow survived long enough to make history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's dark, muddy journey together. If you thought medieval Europe had a monopoly on chaos, crime, and spectacularly bad life choices, China's long history has a few words, and a few heads, to offer in response. From warlords who rewrote the law to suit themselves, to poisoners who made the imperial court look like a medieval soap opera, here are some of the most dangerous, cunning, and frankly terrifying figures ancient China ever produced. Born around 390 BCE, Shangyang was a statesman and reformer who rose to power in the state of Qin during the Warring States period. He was brilliant, ruthless, and exactly the kind of man who makes other powerful people very nervous. Under Lord Zhao of Qin, Shangyang introduced sweeping legal reforms, collective punishment, rigid social controls, and a system where merit replaced birth. It sounds almost reasonable until you realize he applied the same laws to the nobility with zero exceptions. He reportedly punished the crown prince's tutor for a minor infraction, sending a message that no one was above the code. The nobles seethed, but the state thrived. Qin grew powerful, disciplined, and terrifying. When Lord Zhao died, Shangyang's enemies moved instantly. Accused of rebellion, he tried to flee, but was turned away at an inn because, in a twist of exquisite irony, his own laws prohibited innkeepers from sheltering travelers without documentation. He was captured, executed, and torn apart by chariots in 338 BCE. The man who invented the rules died because of them. History rarely delivers justice this poetic. If you want to understand ancient China's most audacious criminal mastermind, look no further than Lu Bu, a merchant from the state of Wei who decided that buying a prince was simply good business. Around 260 BCE, he encountered Zichu, a Qin prince living in poverty as a hostage in the rival state of Zhao. Lu Bu saw potential where everyone else saw a liability. He bankrolled Zichu's return to Qin, charmed the right people, and arranged for Zichu to become crown prince. Zichu eventually became King Zhuangsheng of Qin. In return, Lu Bu became chancellor, arguably the most powerful man in China. But the scandal didn't stop there. He allegedly gave his own concubine, a woman named Zhao Ji, to the prince, and she was already pregnant with Lu Bu's child. That child would grow up to become Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor. Whether the story is true or court gossip elevated to legend, no one can say for certain. But the accusations haunted the dynasty. When Qin Shi Huang discovered the rumor, Lu Bu was exiled. He died shortly after, reportedly by suicide, taking his secrets with him. A merchant who may have fathered an empire. Not bad for a man who started by selling goods by the roadside. Of all the figures who shaped and destroyed the Qin dynasty, none is more chilling than Zhao Gao. A eunuch official of extraordinary intelligence and extraordinary ambition, Zhao Gao served Qin Shi Huang faithfully, and then, the moment the emperor died in 210 BCE, he made his move. He intercepted the emperor's final decree, which named the capable eldest son Fusu as heir, and forged a new decree ordering Fusu to commit suicide. The rightful heir obliged. In his place, Zhao Gao installed the weak, pliable youngest son, Hu Hai, as the second emperor of Qin. He then systematically eliminated everyone who might challenge him: generals, ministers, and members of the imperial family, through fabricated charges and forced executions. His most famous act of manipulation? He presented a deer to the court and called it a horse. Those who agreed were loyal. Those who corrected him were marked for death. He eventually forced the second emperor to suicide as well, installed a puppet ruler, and then was himself assassinated by that same puppet shortly after. In less than 3 years, Zhao Gao had gutted the most powerful dynasty in Chinese history from the inside. The Qin Empire, which Qin Shi Huang had declared would last 10,000 generations, collapsed after 15 years. Zhao Gao didn't just commit crimes, he committed them on an imperial scale. Wu Zetian herself is a figure of contested legacy, China's only female emperor, ruthless and brilliant in equal measure. But the crimes that surrounded her rise to power belong in any honest catalog of ancient China's darkest moments.
In the court of Emperor Gaozong, Wu Zetian's primary rival was the Empress Wang. According to Tang Dynasty records, Wu Zetian gave birth to a daughter, and the infant was found dead in suspicious circumstances. Wu Zetian accused Empress Wang. Gaozong, devastated and enraged, demoted the empress and elevated Wu Zetian in her place. Whether Wu Zetian arranged her own daughter's death to frame her rival remains one of history's most debated questions. Historians are divided. The sources are Tang court records, written by men who despised her. What is documented? Here's what happened next. Empress Wang and the former consort Zhao were imprisoned, had their hands and feet cut off, and were submerged in wine jars until they died. Wu Zetian reportedly said she wanted to make them drunk to their bones. She then went on to rule China, first through her husband, then through her sons, and finally in her own name for over 50 years. Whatever her crimes, she was never caught. That, in the ancient world, was practically a superpower. Not all of China's notorious figures were individuals. Sometimes, the most dangerous criminals wore religious robes and carried pitchforks. In 184 CE, toward the end of the Han Dynasty, a Taoist healer named Zhang Ju declared that heaven's mandate had shifted. He and his brothers had spent years traveling rural China, offering faith healing to the sick and starving. They built a following of hundreds of thousands. Then they announced the coming of a new age, the Yellow Heaven, and launched one of the largest rebellions in Chinese history. The Yellow Turban Rebellion tore through the Han Empire like a fever. Villages were burned, officials killed, granaries seized. The imperial court, already rotting with corruption and eunuch intrigue, panicked. It took years and the rise of regional warlords, including a young man named Cao Cao, to suppress the uprising. Zhang Jue died before seeing its end. His movement was crushed, his followers scattered or slaughtered. But the warlords empowered to fight them never gave that power back. The Han Dynasty limped on for a few decades before collapsing entirely into the chaos of the Three Kingdoms period. Zhang Jue didn't destroy the Han. He just lit the fire that showed everyone how dry the wood had become. Ask any Chinese schoolchild who the villain of the Three Kingdoms era is, and they will tell you without hesitation: Cao Cao. He is one of history's great dual figures, a man celebrated as a brilliant poet, military strategist, and administrator, and simultaneously reviled as a murderous, treacherous warlord who used the Han Emperor as a puppet and eliminated his enemies with cold efficiency. Cao Cao reportedly massacred entire cities in campaigns of revenge. After his father was killed by the governor of Xiu province, he reportedly slaughtered the civilian population in a series of brutal reprisals.
Historical accounts put the dead in the hundreds of thousands, enough to turn the rivers red. He also famously executed the physician Hua Tuo, one of China's greatest ever doctors, because Hua Tuo suggested brain surgery to cure Cao Cao's headaches. The idea terrified Cao Cao, who suspected assassination. Hua Tuo died in prison. Cao Cao's headaches killed him shortly after.
Whether Cao Cao was a hero of unification or a calculating tyrant depends entirely on which dynasty was writing the history. Either way, he was the most dangerous man in China for 30 years, and he knew it. Babylon, June 323 BCE. The air is thick with heat and the smell of roasted meat, incense, and ambition. Alexander the Great, the man who had crossed deserts, stormed cities, and bent empires to his will, sits at the head of a long marble table. Around him, his generals laugh too loudly and drink too much, their laughter masking exhaustion and quiet fear. The feast is meant to celebrate plans for a new campaign into Arabia, but it feels more like a man daring the gods to notice him one last time. He's 32 years old and undefeated in battle, yet his body shows the toll of conquest. Scars crawl across his arms like faint white lightning. His voice is hoarse, his eyes bloodshot from weeks of drinking and little sleep. But he's still Alexander, and in Babylon, that means no one dares to look away when he raises a cup. "Another toast," he commands, and the room obeys. He drinks deeply. Wine mixed with water, honey, and perhaps something else. The cup clatters back to the table. For a moment, his face tightens. He waves it off with a laugh. The great king who once marched through Persian palaces now struggles to stand from his own table. Some say it began there, a sudden pain, a fire in his belly that would not go out. Others claim he was struck by fever days earlier while inspecting the canals near the Euphrates. But among his inner circle, whispers begin to form, like cracks in marble. Cassander, Antipater's son, had every reason to want him dead. Others had been humiliated, pushed aside, terrified that Alexander's plans to be worshipped as a god would destroy what was left of their fragile loyalties. That night, the music grows louder to drown the tension. Wine flows like the river outside Babylon's gates. The torches burn low, painting the marble walls in flickering gold. And somewhere between laughter and delirium, the conqueror of the world begins to shiver. No one yet dares to say it aloud, but something irreversible has started. The man who never lost a battle may have just lost a fight his sword could not win. One that began with a single drink at Babylon. The morning after the banquet, Babylon stirs under a punishing sun. The palace servants whisper, "The king has fallen ill." At first, it seems harmless enough. Alexander has endured worse. He survived arrow wounds, lung infections, and the kind of exhaustion that kills ordinary men. A little fever. That's nothing. Or so they think. He wakes drenched in sweat, his body trembling as though the whole empire inside him was shaking apart. When attendants offer him wine, he waves it away, muttering that it burns his throat. His generals come to visit, Ptolemy, Perdiccas, and Nearchus, men who had followed him through deserts and rivers of blood. They find him pale, voice thin, yet still insisting on military reports. Even half delirious, he talks of troop formations and fleet construction, as if death itself were just another city to besiege. But the fever climbs higher. Within hours, he's unable to rise from bed. His commanders whisper in the corridors, trying to mask panic with politics.
Was it malaria from the marshes near the Euphrates? Typhoid from contaminated water?
Or something far less natural? Poison slipped into the crater by a trembling hand the night before? Babylon is full of suspects and full of fear. And we're just getting started. From the shadows of ancient China, we now move east toward the sun-scorched plains of Mesopotamia, where one of history's greatest men was quietly losing a battle no army could fight for him. The fever that would bring down Alexander the Great began not on a battlefield, but at a banquet table, somewhere between the third toast and the first symptom of something that would unravel an empire. His generals didn't know it yet, neither did he. Days pass, the fever worsens. His breath grows ragged, his speech slurred. The same man who once ran beside his troops, shouting orders with unbreakable clarity, now struggles to form words. The royal physicians are summoned, their hands shaking as they press cold cloths to his forehead. Some recommend purging, others prayer. None dare admit they are powerless. Still, Alexander refuses to believe his body has betrayed him. "I'll recover," he rasps, as if saying it aloud could make it true. He asks for his armor, demands to see his soldiers, but can't even lift his head. Each day, the rumor spreads further. The king is dying. The streets outside the palace fill with uneasy crowds, soldiers clutching their spears, servants crossing themselves against evil spirits. Inside his chamber, Babylon's greatest conqueror lies burning with fever, whispering plans to invade Arabia, even as his strength drains away. The man who had faced armies without fear now faces his final unseen enemy, one no spear can pierce and no strategy can outwit. By the fifth day, Babylon's royal palace feels less like the seat of an empire and more like a tomb waiting to be sealed. The once bustling halls have gone eerily quiet. Servants move in silence, guards whisper, and courtiers trade glances heavy with dread. The doctors come and go like ghosts, their eyes avoiding the generals. They've run out of explanations or courage. Alexander's fever has not broken. His skin glows with a sickly sheen, and his breathing is shallow, each gasp a small rebellion against whatever force has taken hold of him. His commanders, Ptolemy, Seleucus, and Perdiccas, gather in the antechamber, pretending to discuss military logistics. In truth, they're already calculating the impossible question: who rules the world when Alexander doesn't? No one dares to ask it aloud, but ambition has begun to stir beneath the sorrow. Babylon hums with concealed treachery. Every man in that chamber has dreamed at least once of wearing the crown, or at least holding a piece of the empire it represents. The longer Alexander lingers between life and death, the more dangerous the silence becomes. The king's voice, once loud enough to command thousands, is now barely a whisper. "Will I recover?" he asks the physicians. They bow, mutter assurances they don't believe, and flee the room as quickly as they entered. By evening, the corridors are filled with murmurs. Some claim the gods are punishing him for calling himself divine. Others whisper darker things, that poison, not plague, is to blame. Names are thrown around like daggers. Antipater, Cassander, Iolus, even Aristotle, his old teacher, rumored to have provided the fatal recipe. Outside, soldiers kneel before the palace gates, praying for the health of their king. They followed him from Macedonia to India, across deserts and over mountains, believing he was untouchable. Now, for the first time, they sense the truth. He's mortal. That night, Babylon doesn't sleep.
Torches burn low, casting long shadows over marble floors and terrified men. Inside the king's chamber, the sound of dripping water echoes softly, marking the hours. The physicians can do nothing but watch. The silence of the palace deepens, heavy and absolute, as if even the gods are holding their breath. By the seventh day, the fever has turned Alexander's chamber into a battlefield of whispers. His body lies motionless on a silk-draped bed, but his empire, from Greece to India, trembles on invisible fault lines.
The generals gather daily at the palace, pretending to seek updates on his condition, while secretly waging a different war, the one for succession. Perdiccas, the loyal lieutenant, claims he is only following Alexander's last commands, yet his eyes reveal calculation. Ptolemy, calm and smiling, masks ambition behind diplomacy. Seleucus stands silent, watching everyone, as if already measuring how long each man would last without a king to obey. The room reeks of incense, sweat, and deceit. The question gnaws at them all. Who inherits an empire built around one man's will? Alexander has no legitimate heir.
His wife Roxana is pregnant, but the child's fate is uncertain. Some whisper that Heracles, his illegitimate son, could be proclaimed king. Others murmur that the generals should divide the realm, an idea that sounds like blasphemy, but tastes like freedom. Outside the sick room, Babylon's courtyards buzz with tension. The army waits, restless and suspicious. Macedonian veterans, hardened by decades of conquest, demand to see their commander. They will not take orders from anyone else. They mutter that if Alexander dies, they will choose their own leaders, a promise that chills the generals to their bones.
Inside, the air grows staler by the hour. The royal physicians suggest rituals to appease the gods, desperate to look useful. Priests chant beside his bed, fanning the heavy incense smoke. Alexander, half conscious, murmurs commands, perhaps to his troops, perhaps to shadows. His eyes open occasionally, glazed yet defiant, even dying. He looks like a man about to issue an order that could change the world. The generals watch him, torn between loyalty and fear. They need him to live, but also dread what he'll do if he recovers and learns of their scheming. Every cough, every sigh feels like an omen. By nightfall, they stand in silence at the edge of his bed, pretending to pray. But each man's thoughts are elsewhere, on armies, provinces, and crowns waiting to be seized. In that dimly lit chamber, the world's most powerful men quietly begin to plan for a world without Alexander. By the 8th day, the palace gates can no longer hold back the tide.
Thousands of soldiers, sunburned, scarred, and still loyal to the man who led them from Macedon to the edge of India, gather outside, demanding to see their king. Rumors have replaced orders. Some say he's recovering. Others whisper he's already dead and that the generals are hiding it to divide the spoils in secret. Inside, the atmosphere grows unbearable. The scent of rot and burning oils mixes with the heavy perfume meant to mask it. The guards outside Alexander's chamber stand like statues, unsure whether they're protecting their king or guarding his corpse.
At last, they decide to let the army pass. One by one, the soldiers file through the great bronze doors. They come barefoot and unarmed, not as warriors, but as mourners. The line stretches endlessly through the palace courtyard, a living river of grief. Inside the royal chamber, Alexander lies still, his face pale as the linens beneath him. He cannot speak. He cannot move.
Yet, as the men enter, something remarkable happens. When each soldier kneels beside the bed, Alexander opens his eyes, just enough to meet theirs. He raises his hands slightly, trembling, but unmistakably alive.
A faint smile crosses his lips. Half a gesture, half a command. It is enough. The soldiers fall to their knees, some weeping openly. They whisper his name like a prayer. In their minds, he's still invincible, a god in human flesh who merely rests before the next campaign. But to the generals, the sight brings no comfort. They see the truth. The king who conquered the world can barely lift his arm. His strength is gone. His empire's glue, his charisma, his will is evaporating. When the last soldier leaves, silence returns.
The army outside chants his name into the night, unaware that the gesture they just witnessed was his final act of command. Inside, the torches flicker. Babylon holds its breath. The vigil has ended. The waiting for death begins.
Still with me? Good, because this is where things get complicated. Alexander is gone, and the world he built is already coming apart. But before we follow the wreckage of his empire, let's sit for a moment with the weight of what just happened. The greatest conqueror in human history died in a borrowed bed in Babylon, and the men around him couldn't even agree on where to bury him. What comes next is not mourning. It's a land grab dressed in funeral clothes.
By the 10th day, the heat in Babylon feels unnatural, like the world itself has taken ill. Inside the palace, the air is thick with incense and despair. The greatest conqueror in history lies motionless, his chest rising only slightly with each breath. Around him, his generals, physicians, and servants hover in silence, pretending not to watch for the moment when his body gives out. Alexander's once bright eyes are half closed, pupils dull and unfocused. His lips move, forming words no one can hear. The physicians wet his mouth with water and honey, but he no longer swallows.
The fever has hollowed him out, leaving only the echo of a man who once shouted orders above the clash of 1,000 spears. Then, at last, the silence breaks. Alexander asks for his soldiers. Word spreads through the palace, and soon the courtyard fills again. One by one, the veterans who followed him across continents enter the chamber. Some kiss his hand, others simply bow, unable to speak. He gestures faintly toward his generals, a final act of unity or command, no one can tell. Someone leans close and asks who should rule after him.
His eyes drift. His breathing slows. The words come out faint, almost lost to the air. To the strongest. A moment later, the hand that once held the fate of nations falls still. The torches flicker as if the gods themselves exhaled. Outside, the chanting soldiers go silent, sensing what has happened before anyone tells them. For a heartbeat, Babylon is utterly still. No war cries, no footsteps, no sound. Just the weight of a death too large for one room to contain. The conqueror of the world has taken his final breath, and the world itself seems unsure how to continue without him. When the word spreads, it doesn't travel, it explodes. Babylon erupts in grief and disbelief. Soldiers tear their tunics, women wail from rooftops, and priests rush to the temples to offer sacrifices that feel meaningless now. The greatest man alive, the living God, is dead. And the empire he forged, that impossible patchwork of cultures and loyalties, shudders like a cracked statue. Inside the palace,
chaos replaces ceremony.
The generals argue in whispers that grow louder with every hour. Who speaks for the king now? Perdiccas demands they wait for official rites. Ptolemy insists on securing the treasury before looters smell weakness. Others talk of taking Alexander's body back to Macedon, but even that sparks a fight. Babylon has become a war council, dressed in mourning clothes. Outside, thousands of soldiers kneel in the dust. Many refuse to believe the news. "He cannot die," one mutters. "He's Alexander." To them, he is not a man, but an idea. And ideas don't die of fever. When the gates finally open, the procession moves like a storm. Torches light the courtyard as the soldiers file in, silent but shaking. The body lies on a raised bier, draped in royal silk, the faint scent of embalming oil already in the air. His armor gleams beside him, the same bronze cuirass that had caught the sun at Gaugamela. Some of the veterans collapse to their knees, pounding their fists against the stone. Others whisper his name over and over, as though repetition could undo death. That night, Babylon doesn't sleep. Fires burn along the city walls, 1,000 small suns flickering against the desert sky. For 12 years, Alexander's name had meant victory, destiny, divine favor. Now, it means something heavier: loss. In the echoing streets of Babylon, a single truth settles like dust after battle. No one can rule the world forever, not even Alexander. Death did not end Alexander's wars. It merely changed the battlefield. Within days of his passing, Babylon's marble halls became a chessboard of ambition. The generals who once toasted his victories now plot in the same rooms where his body lies embalmed in honey and myrrh. His corpse, radiant and eerily lifelike, becomes the most coveted relic on earth, the symbol of authority itself. Whoever possesses it, some whisper, holds the right to rule. Perdiccas, as commander of the royal army, takes charge of the arrangements. He declares that Alexander's body must be returned to Macedonia to rest beside his father, Philip II. The others nod politely, while quietly planning theft. Ptolemy, the shrewd Macedonian stationed in Egypt, has other ideas. He believes the body belongs in a new capital, his capital, Alexandria. A dead god makes an excellent foundation for a living city. The golden funeral carriage is unlike anything the world has ever seen. A rolling temple adorned with statues, columns, and a gilded canopy glittering under the sun. It will take months to reach Macedon, and everyone knows there are plenty of opportunities for it to change direction. True to form, Ptolemy strikes first. As the funeral procession crosses Syria, his forces intercept it. The guards, realizing they're outnumbered, surrender the cart without bloodshed. Alexander's body is taken to Egypt, not to Macedon, not to his homeland, but to the sands of the Nile. When news reaches Babylon, outrage mingles with resignation. Some call it theft. Others call it destiny. After all, Alexander had always admired Egypt, had even been declared the son of Zeus Ammon there. But for his former generals, the theft is no holy act. It's a declaration of war. The age of Alexander ends not with peace or mourning, but with a scramble for his ghost. The man who united the world in life now divides it in death. In the months after his death, Alexander's empire fractures like glass dropped from Olympus. The unity he'd forced through charisma and conquest collapses under the weight of human greed. His generals, once bound by his brilliance, now carve the world into kingdoms. They call themselves the Diadochi, successors, but each behaves like a scavenger at a divine feast.
Perdiccas claims to rule as regent for Roxana's unborn son. Ptolemy secures Egypt, guarding the stolen body like a holy relic. Antigonus takes Asia. Seleucus eyes Babylon, and Cassander seizes Greece. The empire of one man splinters into rival realms, each dripping with ambition and betrayal. Meanwhile, Alexander's corpse becomes more powerful than any living king. Ptolemy installs it in Memphis, then later moves it to a marble tomb in Alexandria, where pilgrims line up to see the man who once called himself the son of Zeus. Over the years, the tomb becomes a shrine, a political symbol, and eventually, a mystery. Its exact location vanishes from record, as if even death refused to pin him down. Stories begin to spread like wildfire. Some say Alexander never truly died, that he ascended to the gods who fathered him.
Others claim his body refused to decay, proof of divine favor. Poets sing of his exploits, painting him as both conqueror and saint, tyrant and visionary. To the Greeks, he is Achilles reborn. To the Persians, a cursed destroyer. To later generations, a myth that will not fade. Alexander the Great may have fallen in Babylon, but the myth he created, brilliant, ruthless, and immortal, never truly stopped marching.
We're heading south now, to the Mediterranean, to Egypt, to a queen who understood something that Caesar, Antony, and every Roman senator failed to grasp. Power is not seized, it is seduced. Cleopatra VII was not history's most beautiful woman. She was its most dangerous mind. And the Rome that mocked her would spend centuries trying to forget that she very nearly won. The year is 48 BCE. Egypt is divided, not by foreign invaders, but by family.
Cleopatra VII, the last daughter of the Ptolemaic dynasty, finds herself driven from Alexandria by her younger brother and co-ruler, Ptolemy XIII. The royal court has turned against her, a nest of scheming eunuchs and tutors who whisper poison into the boy king's ear. Cleopatra flees into the desert with only a handful of loyal followers, leaving behind the marble halls of the palace for a tent beneath the endless Egyptian stars. Meanwhile, far to the west, Julius Caesar arrives in Alexandria, not as a lover, but as a man of law, or at least Roman law.
He's chasing the ghost of Pompey, his rival and former ally, who has fled to Egypt for safety. But when Caesar lands on Egyptian soil, he discovers a gruesome gift: Pompey's severed head, presented by Ptolemy's courtiers in a misguided attempt to please Rome. Caesar is not amused. It's in this volatile moment that Cleopatra makes her move. She knows Egypt's throne is not won with armies, but with opportunity, wrapped in a carpet or perhaps a linen sack, depending on which historian you trust. She has herself smuggled into Caesar's private chambers in the royal palace.
When the rug unfurls, the conqueror of Gaul finds not an assassin, but a 21-year-old queen, disheveled from travel, yet radiant with confidence. Cleopatra speaks 7 languages. Caesar speaks power. Between them, words become weapons, and admiration a kind of treaty. She pleads her case not as a helpless exile, but as a ruler wronged by treachery. Caesar listens, intrigued. He's 52, weary from decades of war. But in this Egyptian queen, he sees a reflection of his own ambition, relentless, intelligent, and unafraid. By morning, alliances are forged in silk sheets and strategy.
What began as a political calculation soon ripens into something far more dangerous, a partnership that will scandalize empires and change the course of history. Caesar's arrival in Egypt was supposed to be a diplomatic errand. Instead, it became a war zone. The moment he declared Cleopatra the rightful ruler, the palace erupted in chaos. Ptolemy XIII's advisors, especially the scheming eunuch Pothinus and the general Achillas, saw Caesar's decision as foreign interference. To them, Cleopatra wasn't a queen restored, she was a Roman puppet. And if Egypt's throne was to be defended, Rome itself would have to be expelled.
The city of Alexandria, once the jewel of the Mediterranean, turned into a battlefield. The narrow streets echoed with clashing steel, while smoke from burning ships clouded the harbor. Caesar found himself besieged inside the royal quarter, trapped between the Egyptian army and the restless citizens. For all his military genius, Caesar had come to Egypt with barely 4,000 men, hardly enough to hold a city of 500,000. Cleopatra remained by his side, calm amidst the chaos. She wasn't merely a figure of beauty in distress. She was calculating, persuasive, and perfectly aware that her survival was tied to his. Together, they transformed the palace into a fortress. Caesar, always the tactician, set fire to the Egyptian fleet to prevent it from blocking his escape, an act that accidentally spread to the Great Library, sending thousands of papyrus scrolls up in flames. The siege dragged on for months. Then salvation arrived. Roman reinforcements under Mithridates of Pergamon broke through the Egyptian lines. Ptolemy XIII fled and drowned in the Nile, weighed down by his golden armor. A fitting end for a child monarch undone by pride and politics. As smoke cleared over Alexandria, Cleopatra emerged victorious, not just as Queen of Egypt, but as the woman who had tamed both a civil war and the most powerful general in the world. To secure her legitimacy, Cleopatra followed Ptolemaic custom and married her surviving younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, a boy barely in his teens. It was a political formality, the kind of ceremony performed for tradition's sake, while the real power sat beside her, Julius Caesar. Alexandria was transformed from a war-torn city into a stage of spectacle and revival. Cleopatra ruled from the palace on the Mediterranean shore, resplendent in gold and lapis lazuli, while Caesar remained as her guest, or perhaps her captive by affection. Then came the news that changed everything. Cleopatra was pregnant. The announcement electrified Alexandria and horrified Rome. Caesar was already married, and no Roman law permitted marriage to a foreign monarch. Yet in the palace gardens, Cleopatra glowed with triumph. The child she carried, later known as Caesarion, would be the living symbol of their union, a bridge between empires, or perhaps a fuse waiting to ignite them. In 47 BCE, Julius Caesar finally prepared to return to Rome, yet he did not leave alone. Cleopatra accompanied him down the Nile in what became one of history's most extravagant river journeys. The royal barge shimmered with purple sails. Musicians played from the decks. For a few precious months, they traveled together through temples and ancient tombs, Caesar as Dionysus, Cleopatra as Isis. But Rome was never far from Caesar's mind. He left Egypt reluctantly, promising to send for her later. Against all advice, Cleopatra arrived in Rome with her infant, Caesar, and an entourage that dazzled even the cynical Romans. Caesar lodged her in his villa across the Tiber, within sight of the city, as if daring the Senate to protest. Cleopatra walked the streets with confidence, adorned in gold and Egyptian linen. She spoke cautiously, observed everything, and charmed those who mattered. Yet she knew she was walking on the edge of a blade. Caesar's affection protected her for now, but envy was already brewing in the marble halls of power. Behind the admiration and ceremony, daggers were being sharpened. By 44 BCE,
Julius Caesar stood at the height of his power and on the edge of a knife. He had been declared dictator perpetuus, dictator for life, an honor that sounded more like a curse to Roman senators. To Romans who still clung to the illusion of the Republic, it was blasphemy. Cleopatra watched the unfolding drama from her villa across the Tiber. She saw the shifting glances, the tense silences in the Senate. Her instincts, sharpened by years of palace intrigue, told her what Caesar refused to see. Power never rests unchallenged.
The omens grew darker. A seer warned him to beware the Ides of March. His wife, Calpurnia, dreamed of his death and begged him not to attend the Senate that day. But Caesar laughed. On the morning of the 15th, he entered the theater of Pompey. The irony of the location lost on no one. It was beneath the statue of his old rival that his fate awaited. Surrounded by men he considered allies, Caesar took his seat. Then came the first dagger, and another, then 20 more.
When he finally saw Brutus among them, the man he trusted like a son, his strength faltered. "Et tu, Brute?" he whispered, or so legend claims, before collapsing at the base of Pompey's statue. For Rome, it was the end of a dictator. For Cleopatra, it was the beginning of a reckoning. She slipped away in the night, her ship sailing before dawn. The voyage home was silent and tense. When Alexandria's lighthouse appeared on the horizon, Cleopatra exhaled for the first time in weeks. She had returned a widow of empire, carrying not only a child, but a legacy soaked in Roman blood. In the marble halls of her palace, she swore a quiet oath. Caesar might be dead, but through Caesarion, his line, and her ambition would live. In the power vacuum left by Caesar's assassination, Rome tore itself apart once again. Out of the chaos rose Mark Antony, Caesar's loyal general, charismatic, ambitious, and dangerously impulsive. Cleopatra watched from Alexandria with cautious fascination. Unlike the cold, calculating Caesar, Antony ruled through emotion. He drank heavily, loved theatrically, and fought with the energy of a man trying to outlive his own vices. Yet beneath his recklessness, Cleopatra recognized something else: opportunity. In 41 BCE, Antony summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus to answer accusations that she had betrayed Rome during the civil wars. Most rulers would have gone trembling. Cleopatra arrived as a goddess. Her golden barge sailed up the Cydnus River with purple sails billowing in the wind, silver oars flashing in the sunlight. Incense drifted across the water. Attendants dressed as cupids fanned her throne. Antony, waiting on the shore, found himself watching a legend come to life. When Cleopatra stepped ashore, she didn't bow. She greeted Antony as an equal. Within days, he was captivated. The meeting that was supposed to be an interrogation became a coronation of desire. Cleopatra knew exactly what she was doing. She had traded one Roman general for another, but this time, she would be the one setting the terms. Their partnership quickly deepened into passion and politics intertwined. They called themselves the inimitable livers, lovers who lived like gods. Yet beneath the laughter, the stakes were deadly serious. Cleopatra needed a protector. Antony needed her wealth to fund his campaign against Parthia. Each pretended it was love. Each knew it was power. In the years that followed, Cleopatra bore him 3 children. To her people, she was Isis incarnate. To the Romans, she was once again the dangerous enchantress who had corrupted another of their heroes. Octavian, Caesar's heir, understood how to weaponize it. He painted Antony as a man enslaved by a foreign queen, declaring that Cleopatra sought to make Rome her servant. It was a lie, but a useful one. The image of the proud Roman general bowing to an Egyptian temptress was enough to ignite war.
When the final conflict came, the Battle of Actium, it would destroy them both. But that is another story, one that ends in tragedy and immortality. For now, as the sun set over the Nile, Cleopatra stood on her palace balcony, her children sleeping and Antony laughing below. She had loved 2 Romans and outlived both in legend. Their empires would fade, but her myth, the Queen of Kings, the woman who ensnared Rome itself, would never die. In ancient Egypt, death was not the end. It was the beginning of eternity. Life on Earth was seen as a fleeting test, a brief rehearsal for the great voyage to the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that when a person died, their soul, the Ka, left the body, but still needed a physical form to return to. Without preservation, the Ka would wander aimlessly, lost between worlds. Thus began one of humanity's most astonishing rituals, mummification, a sacred craft that transformed the dead into divine beings. The moment death was declared, the 70-day countdown began. The family summoned a team of specialized priests.
Known as the servants of Anubis, these men were not ordinary morticians. They were guardians of cosmic order, repeating the same rites perfected over thousands of years. Before touching the body, they performed purification rituals, washing themselves in sacred water, burning incense, and reciting hymns to Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming. The embalmers began by laying the body on a slanted stone table, washing it with palm wine and water from the Nile. This was both physical and spiritual cleansing. The Nile's waters symbolized rebirth. The extracted organs were placed in 4 beautifully carved canopic jars, each guarded by one of the sons of Horus. The jackal-headed Duamatef protected the stomach. The falcon-headed Kebesenuef guarded the intestines. Hapi, with the head of a baboon, watched over the lungs, and Imseti, with a human face, guarded the liver. With the organs removed and the body cleansed, the next stage began, the drying. This was the longest and most crucial phase of mummification, lasting 40 full days. The priests carried the body and surrounded it with natron, a natural salt harvested from Egypt's desert lakes. This mixture of sodium carbonate and bicarbonate was seen as a gift from the gods, capable of drawing out the corrupting forces of the earth. The body was completely buried in it, covered head to toe. Days turned into weeks, the desert air working in harmony with the natron's power. When the time came to lift the body from its salty tomb, what emerged was astonishing. The flesh had darkened and tightened, the features preserved in uncanny clarity. Fingers, lips, even eyelashes often remained intact, a human form frozen in time. The priests gently brushed off the remaining natron and washed the body once more in fragrant oils. The human body, once frail and fleeting, had been refined into something divine. The wrapping was the most sacred and symbolically charged stage, a ritual that transformed the body from a mortal shell into an eternal being. Linen strips, sometimes hundreds of meters long, were prepared from the finest flax. Each bandage was purified with incense and oils before touching the skin. The process could take 15 full days, not because it was slow, but because it was sacred.
Every layer was a spell, every knot a prayer. As the layers grew thicker, amulets were inserted between them, over the heart, the throat, and the abdomen. At the chest, a large scarab amulet was placed, inscribed with spells from the Book of the Dead. Its purpose was profound. It silenced the heart during divine judgment, preventing guilt from condemning the soul. The final bandages were arranged in intricate diamond patterns.
A golden mask was placed over the face, representing the divine image the deceased would wear forever. When the priest stepped back, the human was gone. In its place lay a godlike figure, silent, radiant, and eternal. The opening of the mouth ceremony was the most profound ritual in the entire process, for it restored the senses of the deceased and reconnected body and soul. Only after this rite could the spirit eat, speak, see, and breathe in the afterlife. The chief officiant, often wearing the mask of Anubis, stood before the mummy, holding a sacred instrument known as the peshkef. Shaped like a small blade or chisel, it was modeled after the tool used in childbirth, symbolizing a second birth into eternity.
The peshkef was touched to the mouth, eyes, ears, and nose of the mummy. Each touch was accompanied by a declaration. May your mouth open to speak the words of truth. May your eyes open to see the light of Ra. May your nostrils open to breathe the air of life. With the opening of the mouth complete, the body had been reborn. The procession to the tomb began at sunrise. Priests, mourners, and family members walked through the desert, carrying the mummy in a gilded coffin, a work of devotion, painted with hieroglyphic spells, adorned with protective deities. Musicians played mournful flutes, while professional mourners wailed to echo the cries of the goddess Isis, mourning her husband Osiris. Inside the tomb, the burial chamber awaited, walls painted with vivid scenes of paradise, the soul sailing with Ra across the heavens, hunting in green fields, greeting long-lost ancestors. As the final act, the coffin was gently lowered into the sarcophagus. The priests sealed the chamber with stone, reciting the words, "May your soul live forever in the field of reeds." When silence returned to the desert, only the wind remained, carrying prayers across the sands. Deep within the tomb, the preserved body rested in stillness, awaiting its next awakening under the eternal sun of Ra. Once the tomb was sealed, the Ka and the Ba, the personality or spirit, began their passage through the unseen world. Guided by spells from the Book of the Dead, the deceased ventured into the Duat, the vast, shadowy realm of the afterlife. Eventually, the soul reached the Hall of Ma'at, the place of divine judgment. There, before 42 gods, Anubis weighed the heart on a golden scale against the feather of Ma'at, the symbol of truth and cosmic balance. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, recorded the result. If the heart was light, it meant the person had lived with integrity. If heavy with sin, it was cast to Ammit, part lion, crocodile, and hippopotamus, who would consume it, ending the soul forever. For those who passed the test, Osiris himself, the resurrected god of the underworld, welcomed them. "You are justified," he declared. The soul then transformed into an Akh, a perfected spirit of light. Through ritual, prayer, and craftsmanship, the Egyptians had turned death into art, the art of becoming eternal. To them, immortality was not a dream. It was a skill, learned and perfected, layer by sacred layer, beneath the burning sun of Egypt.